A young tourist named Sarah had always dreamed of traveling to cities steeped in history, with their grand buildings and centuries-old traditions. One such destination was the bustling heart of the royal city, famous for its ancient landmarks and charming streets. Sarah had arrived with nothing but excitement and wonder, eager to explore and take in everything the city had to offer. The day she arrived was bright and crisp, perfect for sightseeing. The streets were filled with people, and the air had a certain energy. Sarah was particularly captivated by the area where the royal guards stood on duty. These guards, dressed in immaculate uniforms, were a symbol of the city's long-standing traditions and history. She had heard about them from friends, who spoke of their precision, discipline, and the fact that they were often stationed near the royal palace. But seeing them in person was something entirely different, something almost magical. As Sarah wandered through the crowd, she couldn't resist the urge to get closer to the guards. She had heard that they were an important part of the city's heritage, and she felt compelled to capture the moment. There were royal guards everywhere, standing perfectly still, their horses equally magnificent, towering over the crowd with their shiny coats and calm, patient demeanor. Sarah's excitement grew. She had to take a perfect photo to show her friends back home. The closer she got, the more she could see the pride in the guards' posture and the sheer elegance of their horses. Each of them looked like they had stepped out of a history book, standing as statuesque figures frozen in time. Sarah's eyes widened in amazement as she marveled at the attention to detail in their uniforms. The gleaming swords at their sides, the polished buttons, and the stiff, formal stance they held spoke volumes about their dedication to the role. But as she stood there, admiring the scene, she couldn't help herself. She edged closer to one of the royal horses, thinking that if she could just get a little closer, she'd have the perfect shot. The horses, though beautiful and calm, were still majestic creatures. Sarah was so caught up in the moment, trying to find the best angle, that she didn't notice the subtle movements of the horse she had approached. The guard, who had been standing perfectly still just moments ago, began to look at her with sharp, attentive eyes. His expression was unreadable, but there was no mistaking the warning in the way he shifted his weight. Sarah, oblivious to the growing tension, took another step forward, her camera raised high. She wasn't trying to be disrespectful. She simply wanted to capture the beauty of the moment. But in her eagerness, she failed to understand the rules that governed the area and the silent understanding between the guards and the public. The space around the horses wasn't just for admiration. It was sacred, a space meant for respect and distance. The guard's eyes never left her, and the horse shifted slightly, its hooves clattering against the stone ground. Sarah, still caught up in the excitement, continued to inch closer, determined to get the perfect shot. She felt like she was on the verge of something incredible. Little did she know, this moment would quickly take a turn that she hadn't expected. As Sarah stood there, fully absorbed in her quest for the perfect photo, she began to feel a sense of excitement that bubbled up inside her. The horses were so much more magnificent up close, and the guards, standing tall and proud in their regal attire, were part of something much bigger than she had imagined. Her fingers tightened around the camera, eager to snap the shot that would surely impress her friends back home. However, what Sarah didn't realize was that she was crossing a line, an invisible boundary that marked the space between admiration and disrespect. The royal guards were not just part of the city's history. They were there to uphold traditions, respect, and order. The horses, too, were not just animals. They were part of an intricate, carefully maintained tradition, trained to be calm and poised, but not without their own instincts. As Sarah continued to inch closer, she felt the air shift around her. The atmosphere had changed from one of calm admiration to something more tense. She heard the subtle rustle of the guard's uniform as he shifted his weight, and a soft clink of the harness on the horse as it moved slightly. The change was so slight, it could almost be missed by anyone not paying attention. But the guard wasn't the type to miss anything, and neither was his horse. He gave her a quick glance, his eyes narrowing ever so slightly. It was a look that spoke volumes. Sarah paused for a moment, sensing something wasn't right. But in her eagerness to capture the perfect moment, she brushed off the thought and took another step closer. The horse, perhaps sensing that Sarah was too close, shifted its weight again, this time turning its head slightly in her direction. Its large eyes seemed to focus on her as though it were making an assessment. The guard, noticing this, took a few steps forward, closing the space between him and Sarah. "Excuse me, miss," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "Please step back. You're too close." Sarah froze, momentarily startled by the guard's voice. She hadn't meant to upset anyone. She just wanted a photo. A glance at the horse revealed that it was now looking directly at her, its large body tense, ready to react to any further provocation. The guard's warning wasn't something she could simply ignore anymore, but despite his calm tone, Sarah wasn't sure why he was making such a big deal out of it. She was just taking a picture after all. Just a few more steps, Sarah thought, as she raised her camera again, determined to get that perfect shot. But the guard had already made his judgment. His eyes, though polite, were stern, and the way he held himself left no room for debate. "Step back now," he said again, his voice more insistent this time. He was no longer simply a figure of tradition and order. He was a protector, making sure both his horse and the tourists respected the rules. The horse, clearly agitated now, shifted again, snorting softly, its large body moving with surprising agility for such a massive animal. Sarah glanced around, her excitement turning into confusion. She hadn't expected this response. She thought it was just a harmless moment, but now it seemed like she had done something wrong. At that moment, Sarah realized the seriousness of her mistake. She had failed to recognize that the space around the royal guards wasn't just for sightseeing. It was a space for respect, something she had ignored in her pursuit of the perfect photo. The tension in the air became more noticeable as Sarah stepped back, still feeling a bit confused by the guard's insistence. She had never imagined that getting close to the horses would cause such a stir. Her mind raced, wondering if she had done something wrong. She looked around at the crowd of onlookers who had stopped to watch, some with expressions of surprise, others looking at her with a mixture of curiosity and concern. The royal guard remained calm, his posture stiff and authoritative, but his eyes never left Sarah. The horse, however, was a different story. It was no longer the calm, statuesque creature it had been moments ago. Its muscles were tense, its large eyes focused intently on Sarah. The powerful animal shifted its weight again, causing Sarah to instinctively take another small step back. But even this small movement wasn't enough to ease the horse's growing discomfort. It was clear that it had been disturbed by Sarah's close presence. The royal guard, noticing the horse's unease, took a step closer to the animal, gently but firmly guiding it with his hand. The horse calmed slightly, but the tension in its body was still present. The guard's eyes never left Sarah, his gaze steady and unwavering, as if silently warning her to respect the space between them. Sarah, now fully aware of the mistake she had made, felt a wave of embarrassment wash over her. She hadn't meant to upset anyone, least of all the guards who were part of such an important tradition. But her desire to get a perfect photo had clouded her judgment, and now she was facing the consequences of her thoughtlessness. The guard's stern yet composed demeanor left no room for excuses. He wasn't angry, but his duty to protect the horse and uphold the rules was clear. Sarah, realizing that she had overstepped, took a deep breath and began to step further back, her camera now hanging loosely at her side. She understood that no photo was worth making either the guard or the horse feel threatened. The horse, still on edge, took another small step forward, its hooves clattering softly against the cobblestones. The sound was like a gentle reminder of the power and authority that lay beneath its calm exterior. As Sarah backed away, her embarrassment grew. She couldn't help but feel like she had been foolish, like she had taken something beautiful and turned it into an uncomfortable situation for everyone involved. She watched the royal guard, standing tall and proud, his posture never wavering. His role was so much more than just standing in uniform. It was about maintaining a sense of order and respect, something Sarah had not fully understood until this moment. The crowd around them had slowly started to murmur, some people exchanging glances as they noticed the shift in the atmosphere. Sarah realized that the attention had shifted from her initial excitement about the horses to the awareness of her mistake. The once peaceful moment had now become a subtle spectacle. She lowered her gaze and took a few more steps back, trying to blend into the crowd. As she moved away, the guard finally relaxed his stance, allowing the horse to return to its original position, calm once again. The tension had not completely disappeared, but the moment of discomfort had passed. Sarah's heart was still racing, her thoughts swirling. She had learned something valuable in those few brief minutes: respect for tradition, the importance of boundaries, and the power of understanding the space others needed. She vowed to be more mindful of those lessons as she continued to explore the city, realizing that some moments were meant to be admired from a distance, not rushed through for the sake of a photo. As Sarah slowly walked away, her mind continued to replay the events in her head. She could still feel the eyes of the royal guard on her, steady and unwavering, and the quiet tension that had built up between her and the horse. The experience had shaken her more than she expected. What had seemed like a harmless moment, an innocent desire to capture a perfect picture, had escalated into something much more serious. Sarah tried to push the embarrassment away, telling herself that it was a simple mistake, but it wasn't so easy to forget. Her curiosity had gotten the best of her, and now she was feeling the weight of it. It wasn't just the guard's stern warning that lingered in her mind, but the unsettling feeling that she had somehow disturbed something far larger than herself. The royal guards weren't just soldiers standing on duty. They were a symbol of respect and tradition, a long-held part of the city's identity. And she, with her desire for a photo, had unknowingly crossed the line. The crowd around her had shifted back into its usual rhythm. People were still taking pictures, laughing and chatting, but Sarah felt like she had become part of an unspoken story. Her moment had been interrupted, and in that interruption, she realized that there were some things in life that were not to be taken lightly. The horse's sudden reaction, the guard's silent authority, and the tension in the air had taught her an important lesson about respect, boundaries, and understanding. As she continued to move away from the area, Sarah took a moment to observe the other tourists. Some were still in awe of the guards, snapping photos with excitement. But now, Sarah noticed something different. The others seemed to be more careful, more aware of the space around the horses. They were taking their time, admiring the guards from a distance, respecting the silent boundaries that Sarah had overlooked. The whole situation was humbling. It wasn't just about the royal guards or their horses. It was about a deep-rooted tradition that had been passed down through generations. Sarah could see now how important it was for people to follow the unwritten rules of respect when it came to such matters. The guards were there to uphold not only the law, but also a sense of history, a feeling of pride that connected the present to the past. And by getting too close, Sarah had, in her own way, failed to honor that history. She found a quiet bench a little further down the path and sat down, taking a moment to collect herself. The energy around her seemed to settle as the sounds of the city filled the air. Sarah stared at the guards from a distance now, her thoughts slowing. She could see the calm in their movements, the stillness that was both strong and delicate at the same time. The horses were standing tall, their eyes alert but calm, their powerful bodies radiating a quiet strength that Sarah now understood more than ever. As the minutes passed, Sarah found herself reflecting on the way she had approached the situation. Her initial excitement had been innocent, but her failure to recognize the boundaries of others had led to a sense of discomfort, both for herself and for the people around her. She had learned that curiosity, while often a good thing, needed to be tempered with understanding and respect. Some spaces, like the one around the royal guards and their horses, were sacred, and their purpose went far beyond just being a backdrop for photos. The guard's warning had been clear, but it was his quiet strength that had stayed with Sarah the most. He had done his duty, not with anger or frustration, but with calm authority. And in that moment, she realized that sometimes the most important lessons come not from what we see, but from the spaces we respect. The minutes that followed Sarah's departure from the Royal Guard's post felt like a blur. She couldn't shake the feeling of embarrassment, but she was also deeply reflective. She had crossed a line, one she hadn't fully understood until the moment it was pointed out to her. The incident, though brief, had left her with a profound sense of respect for the Royal Guards and the traditions they represented. As Sarah sat on the bench a little farther down the path, her thoughts drifted. She looked up at the sky, taking in the peaceful, clear blue. The bustling city had not lost its charm. In fact, it seemed to carry on in its usual way, indifferent to the awkwardness she had just experienced. People continued to walk past her, chatting, taking pictures, and enjoying their day, oblivious to the quiet realization that had settled in her mind. Her eyes returned to the Royal Guard, who was still stationed where he had been, his posture as rigid as ever. Sarah had not expected such a simple moment to leave such a lasting impression on her. The Royal Guard's response had been calm and composed, yet firm. He had not raised his voice or shown any aggression, yet he had conveyed all the authority needed to maintain respect for the space he and the horses occupied. It was clear now that this wasn't just about the horses or the uniforms. It was about maintaining a balance, a sense of order, in a place that was steeped in history and culture. While Sarah sat, she couldn't help but feel a little humbled. She knew she hadn't meant to disrespect anyone. She had been caught up in her excitement, her desire to capture the grandeur of the moment. But that didn't change the fact that she had made a mistake. And in that moment, she realized that respect wasn't something you could just expect. It was something you had to earn, something you had to give. Respect for others, for traditions, and even for the space they occupied, was a principle that extended far beyond just a simple interaction with the Royal Guard. It was a lesson that was universal, one that applied to all areas of life. As Sarah stood up to continue her journey, she felt a small sense of relief. The tension she had felt earlier had finally started to fade. She still felt a little awkward, but she knew she had learned something important from the experience. She walked slowly, her thoughts still reflecting on the incident. The guard's warning had been a reminder of how easily boundaries could be crossed and how important it was to be mindful of the world around you. As she continued walking through the city, the sense of awe she had felt earlier returned, but this time it was mixed with a quiet understanding. The city was alive with history, and every corner she turned held a story that deserved to be respected. The Royal Guards, standing still with their horses, were a living part of that history, a symbol of tradition, of the care that had gone into preserving the city's legacy. The more Sarah walked, the more she began to understand the role of the guard, the quiet duty he performed each day. It wasn't just about standing still. It was about ensuring that those who admired the horses and the uniforms did so with a sense of reverence. And though she had made a mistake, she now felt a deep sense of gratitude for the lesson she had learned, a lesson that had come not through words, but through a moment of silence and respect. By the time Sarah reached the end of her walk, her perspective had shifted. What had started as a simple sightseeing trip had turned into an experience of personal growth. The city, the Royal Guards, and the quiet power of tradition had taught her the importance of respecting the spaces and people around her, something she would carry with her in all her future travels. As Sarah continued her walk through the city, her mind kept drifting back to the moment with the Royal Guard. The feeling of awkwardness hadn't fully faded, but it had been replaced by a deeper sense of understanding. She knew she had made a mistake, but she also knew that mistakes were often the best way to learn important lessons. And this particular lesson, respect for tradition and boundaries, was something she wouldn't forget easily. As she passed through the narrow streets, Sarah couldn't help but notice the way the city seemed to hum with a quiet energy. There was something different now in how she viewed everything around her. The guards, the horses, even the cobblestone streets, all seemed to hold a new kind of meaning. They weren't just part of the city's backdrop. They were active participants in a living, breathing history that stretched far beyond her own understanding. Sarah paused for a moment at a small cafe, deciding to take a break and process everything. She found a seat outside on the terrace, enjoying the warm sun on her face and the gentle breeze. People bustled around her, going about their day, laughing, talking, and enjoying their time in the city. But Sarah felt a quiet calm settling over her. It was almost as if the lesson she had learned from the Royal Guard had also taught her something deeper about herself. Her mind wandered back to the earlier moment with the horse. She hadn't meant any harm, of course. Her intentions had been innocent. She just wanted to capture a memory, a beautiful image that would remind her of her time in the city. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that it wasn't just about her. It wasn't just about the perfect photograph, or the thrill of seeing something so magnificent up close. It was about recognizing the importance of the things around her, the traditions that had been built up over generations, and understanding that they deserved respect. As Sarah sat there, sipping her drink and watching the world go by, she started to think about how often she took things for granted. She had spent so much of her life moving quickly from one place to the next, always looking for the next adventure or the next big thing. But today had been different. Today had been about slowing down, observing, and appreciating the things that truly mattered. Sarah's thoughts shifted to the Royal Guard. She imagined the life they led, standing on duty day after day, in the same spot, in the same uniform. It must have taken a great deal of discipline and pride to serve in such a role. And despite the calm exterior they projected, Sarah realized there was much more to it. It wasn't just about standing still. It was about maintaining order in a world that was constantly changing. It was about protecting something much bigger than themselves, something that represented the city's past, its values, and its history. In a way, Sarah felt that she had been given a gift today, a reminder to approach life with more patience and consideration. She had learned that things were not always as simple as they seemed at first. She had taken a lesson from the Guard's quiet authority, understanding that boundaries existed for a reason. She knew now that it wasn't just about respecting people, it was about respecting the spaces, the traditions, and the histories that shaped them. As she finished her drink and got up to continue her day, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. Her visit to the royal city had turned into more than just a tourist trip. It had become a personal journey, one that had taught her more about the world around her and about herself. And though she still felt a little embarrassed by the earlier mistake, she knew that it had been an important step in her growth. With a smile on her face and a deeper understanding of her surroundings, Sarah continued her exploration of the city. The royal guards and their horses were no longer just figures in the distance. They were a reminder of the lessons she had learned, lessons that would stay with her long after she left the city. She had gained a new perspective on the world, one that would make her a more thoughtful and respectful traveler in the future. As Sarah continued her day, she couldn't help but notice how the city around her seemed to take on a new life. Everything felt different now, more meaningful. The hustle and bustle of the streets, the laughter of families sitting in cafes, and the distant hum of the traffic all felt more connected, as though she were seeing the world through a new lens. She moved slowly, taking in the sights and sounds with a newfound appreciation for the details she had once overlooked. The earlier incident with the Royal Guard was still in her mind, but instead of feeling embarrassed or frustrated, Sarah felt a sense of quiet understanding. She realized that the world didn't always operate according to her expectations. Sometimes things didn't go the way you imagined, and that was okay. What mattered was how you responded to those moments. The Royal Guard's composed reaction had taught her the importance of maintaining composure and respect, even when things didn't go as planned. As Sarah strolled through the city, she began to notice how others interacted with their surroundings, particularly the tourists. Some were still snapping photos of the Royal Guards and their horses, just as she had done earlier. But this time, Sarah observed them differently. She saw how many of them stayed at a respectful distance, waiting patiently for their moment, while others tried to approach too close, unaware of the silent boundaries that existed. She thought about how easy it was to get caught up in the excitement of a new place, to forget about the importance of boundaries and respect. The crowd had thinned out a bit as the afternoon sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting a warm golden light over the city. Sarah paused near a fountain, the sound of water soothing as she watched the sunlight dance on the surface of the water. It was in this moment of quiet reflection that she realized how much her perception had shifted since the incident with the Royal Guard. She had started the day thinking she was just a tourist, seeking out the best experiences and memories to share with friends. But now she saw herself as more of a traveler, someone who wanted to learn from the places they visited, not just take photos and check off items on a list. Her thoughts were interrupted when she overheard a conversation between a couple of tourists who were walking past her. They were laughing and discussing their plans to visit the palace later that evening. Sarah couldn't help but smile, remembering how she had been in their shoes just hours ago, filled with excitement and anticipation. But now, she felt like she had a deeper connection to the place, a deeper understanding of what made it special. She realized that the city wasn't just about the monuments or the famous landmarks. It was about the people who had lived there for centuries, upholding traditions and ensuring that the past was honored by the present. Sarah stood up and continued her walk, moving at a slower pace now, her mind processing everything she had learned that day. She passed by the Royal Guard once again, and this time she didn't feel the urge to rush up and take a picture. Instead, she stood quietly for a moment, observing them from a distance. The horses were calm, their powerful bodies standing still with a sense of quiet dignity. The guards, too, were unmoving, their eyes scanning the crowd with a sense of awareness that Sarah now understood. For a moment, Sarah felt as though she were a part of something much larger than herself. She had learned not just about the guards and their horses, but about the importance of respecting the spaces and traditions that shaped the world around her. The city, with all its history and beauty, had taught her the value of patience, the power of silence, and the importance of looking beyond what was immediately in front of her. As the evening light continued to bathe the city in a warm glow, Sarah felt a sense of peace. She had come to the city with the intention of taking photographs, of creating memories. But now, those memories had grown into something deeper, something more meaningful. She would leave this place with a newfound appreciation for the history, the people, and the traditions that had shaped it. And though the mistake she had made earlier would stay with her, she knew it had led her to a greater understanding of what it meant to be a respectful traveler and a more thoughtful person in the world. As Sarah made her way back to her hotel later that evening, she couldn't help but feel a quiet sense of closure. The events of the day had left an imprint on her, but now, as the sun set and the city around her began to glow under the soft evening lights, she felt a sense of peace. The lesson she had learned about respect, boundaries, and understanding had settled deeply within her, and she knew that it would stay with her long after she left the city. She passed by the same royal guard she had encountered earlier, but this time, the sight of the guards and their horses didn't make her feel uneasy or embarrassed. Instead, Sarah felt a wave of gratitude. Gratitude for the guard's patience, for his calm and steady presence in a moment where she had faltered. She understood now that the rules weren't just about maintaining order. They were about preserving something much larger, a connection to the past, a respect for tradition, and a quiet dignity that needed to be upheld, even in the busiest of cities. As Sarah walked, the cool evening breeze brushed against her face, and she looked around at the city's historic architecture, illuminated by the warm glow of streetlights. The buildings, some centuries old, had stood the test of time, just like the traditions that had shaped the city. She could almost hear the echoes of history in the streets, the soft murmur of generations past, guiding her steps. There was something beautiful about the way the city held onto its past while welcoming the present, something that she had come to appreciate in a deeper way. The day, which had started with excitement and anticipation, had ended with a sense of reflection and learning. Sarah had come to the city seeking adventure, but what she found was a lesson in patience, respect, and mindfulness. She realized that it wasn't just about the places she visited or the sights she saw. It was about the connection she made with the people and traditions that made each place unique. By the time Sarah returned to her hotel, the city was quieter, and the hustle and bustle of the day had faded into a peaceful calm. She sat down on the edge of her bed, looking out at the lights twinkling in the distance. It had been a long, eventful day, but it had been one of the most meaningful days of her trip. She had gained a new perspective, one that she would carry with her as she traveled to other places, always remembering the lessons she had learned in this city. As she reflected on the events of the day, Sarah felt a sense of pride. Not for what she had done, but for how she had grown. She had made a mistake, yes, but in the end, it had led her to a deeper understanding of herself and the world around her. She knew now that the best travels weren't always about the perfect photo or the checklist of sights. They were about the lessons learned along the way, the moments of quiet reflection, the encounters with others that opened her eyes to a new way of seeing the world. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling a sense of contentment wash over her. She had come to the city for a short visit, but in the process, she had gained something far more lasting than a few photographs. She had gained a new respect for the world, for the people who preserved its history, and for the quiet power of traditions that connected the past to the present. She had learned the importance of taking a step back, of observing and listening before acting, and she was ready to carry that knowledge with her as she moved forward in her travels and in life.